The morning I found out my retirement account was empty, my daughter-in-law was standing in my kitchen, smiling as if she had just saved me from myself. I did not scream. I did not accuse her. I only looked down at the bank statement in my trembling hands and realized that the money Frank and I had saved for 38 years was gone. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and tell me what city you're watching from. Because what happened inside my family did not begin with money. It began with the day they decided I was too old to notice. The paper felt strangely thin between my fingers. Too light for something carrying the weight of an entire life. I stood by the kitchen counter, where the morning sun came through the white curtains Frank had hung himself 15 years earlier, after I complained that the old blinds made the room feel like a dentist's office. The light touched everything gently. The chipped blue mug beside the sink. The grocery list held to the refrigerator with a magnet from our trip to Niagara Falls. The little orange medication bottle I had left uncapped because my hands had been stiff that morning. Everything looked ordinary. That was the cruelest part. Vanessa stood near the dining table with her purse tucked under one arm, dressed in her cream cardigan and gold earrings, the same polished way she always dressed when she wanted people to think she was responsible. Her brown hair was swept back neatly. Her lipstick was soft pink. Her smile was calm. Too calm. "Evelyn," she said, using that careful voice she had developed over the past year. "You're shaking." I looked at her. Not at her face exactly. At the space between her eyebrows. That was where people's real thoughts sometimes gathered before they had time to hide them. "I'm fine," I said. "You don't look fine." She took one step toward me. I folded the bank statement once. Then again. My fingers did not obey me the way they used to. Arthritis had made small things difficult. Buttons. Pill caps. The clasp on my Sunday necklace. But I managed the paper. I made the fold sharp. Vanessa glanced at it. Only for a second. But I saw it. The flicker. Not surprise. Recognition. My stomach tightened so hard I had to place one hand on the counter. That retirement account had not been large by rich people's standards. Frank and I were not rich. He had worked 31 years as a maintenance supervisor for the school district. I had worked part-time at a bakery, then later at the public library after Michael started middle school. We were careful people. Coupon people. Leftover people. People who turned off lights in empty rooms and waited for Labor Day sales to buy a new mattress. Frank used to call that account our peace money. Not vacation money. Not luxury money. Peace. "Someday," he told me once, sitting right there at the kitchen table with his reading glasses low on his nose, "you'll need this to feel safe. Promise me you won't let anyone make you feel guilty for keeping it." I had laughed at him then. Who would make me feel guilty for that? He had looked down at the checkbook. He did not answer. Frank had been gone for 4 years now. A heart attack took him on a Tuesday morning, while he was watering the tomatoes behind the garage. No dramaticudie. No final speech. Just a garden hose running over the dirt and me standing in the back doorway calling his name. After he died, I kept going because mothers keep going. Widows learn to move through rooms that still remember another person's footsteps. They learn which side of the bed not to look at. They learn to cook soup in smaller pots. But I never touched that retirement account unless I had to. A roof repair. A medical bill Medicare did not fully cover. The new water heater after the old one flooded the basement. I guarded that account because Frank had asked me to. And now it was empty. Vanessa placed her purse on the dining chair. "Maybe you're reading it wrong," she said. There it was. Soft. Polite. Poisoned. I lifted my eyes. "I know how to read a bank statement." Her smile tightened. "Of course you do. I just meant these statements can be confusing now. Everything is digital. Transfers, automatic payments, linked accounts. It's easy to miss something." Now, that word sat between us. Not confusing. Confusing now. As if age had entered the room before I did and testified. Against me. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a lawnmower started in a neighbor's yard. Ordinary sounds. American morning sounds. A weekday in a quiet Ohio suburb where mailboxes stood straight, and people waved from driveways without knowing what happened behind kitchen curtains. I unfolded the statement again and looked at the numbers. Withdrawal. Transfer. Online authorization. Withdrawal. Transfer. Online authorization. 6 months of slow bleeding. Not one dramatic theft. Not one desperate act. A pattern. Careful. Patient. Familiar with my routines. My throat felt dry. Vanessa moved closer. Close enough that I could smell her perfume. Something expensive and floral. "Why don't you let me take a look?" she said. Her hand reached for the paper. I moved it back. Only an inch. But she noticed. Her fingers paused in the air, then curled gently, as if she had only been offering help. "I'm just trying to help," she said. "I know." My voice sounded calm. Too calm, maybe. She studied me then. For the first time that morning, her smile lost its softness. Michael had married Vanessa 8 years earlier. At first, I tried very hard to love her. Not tolerate her. Love her. I invited her for Sunday dinners, asked about her job, bought her a cashmere scarf the first Christmas because Michael said she was always cold. When she redecorated their townhouse and gently implied my old oak hutch was a little too traditional, I swallowed the sting and said young couples should make their own home. I told myself every mother has to step back. I told myself distance was normal. Then Frank died and the distance changed shape. Michael called less. Vanessa called more. First, I was grateful. She offered to pick up groceries. She reminded me about insurance renewals. She sat beside me at the dining table and helped set up online payments because, as she put it, "It'll make life so much easier for you, Evelyn." She said my name often. Never Mom. Evelyn. At the time, I told myself that was just her way. Now I remembered every moment differently. The day she asked where I kept my passwords. The afternoon she said paper statements were unsafe. The morning she offered to simplify my accounts. The way Michael stood in the doorway during those conversations, checking his phone, nodding without listening. Or maybe listening and choosing not to hear. Did Michael know about this? I asked. Vanessa blinked once. What? These transfers. She gave a small laugh, not loud enough to be rude. Just enough to make my question seem unreasonable. "Evelyn, Michael is at work. He doesn't have time to go through every little bank detail." Every little bank detail. My retirement account was empty, and she called it little. I looked past her into the dining room. The table still had the lace runner Frank's sister had made for our 25th anniversary. At the center sat a wooden bowl of apples, 3 of them softening because I had started buying fewer groceries. Not because I was broke exactly, because I had become cautious, without understanding why. Last week, I had stood in the pharmacy aisle holding my blood pressure medication in one hand, and the store-brand calcium tablets in the other, calculating whether both could wait until my next Social Security deposit. I had put the calcium back. The month before that, I had turned the thermostat down to 66 and worn Frank's old gray cardigan around the house. I had told myself everyone felt squeezed these days. Prices were high. Utilities were high. Life was high. I had not imagined someone inside my own family was quietly lowering the floor beneath my feet. Vanessa sighed. It was a delicate sigh. Practiced. The kind people use when they want to appear patient with someone difficult. "Maybe we should call Michael," she said. "I don't want you getting upset and making assumptions." I heard the warning under the concern. Do not accuse me. Do not embarrass yourself. Do not make this harder than it needs to be. I placed the statement flat on the counter and smoothed it with my palm. "My money is gone," I said. Vanessa looked toward the hallway, then back at me. "We don't know that." I tapped the balance with one finger. 0 is not hard to understand. For a moment, neither of us moved. The clock above the stove ticked loudly. Frank had hated that clock. He used to say it sounded like a judge tapping a pencil. I never replaced it because after he died, the ticking made the house feel less empty. Now it sounded like a countdown. Vanessa's phone buzzed inside her purse. She did not check it. That frightened me more than if she had. Vanessa always checked her phone. Always. At dinner. During church coffee hour. While Michael spoke. While I spoke. Especially while I spoke. But now she let it buzz. Once. Twice. 3 times. Her eyes stayed on me. "Evelyn," she said slowly, "before this turns into something hurtful, I think we should remember how much I've done to help you." There it was again. Help. The word had become a fence around me. Help with bills. Help with groceries. help with technology, help with decisions, help with my own life until I was standing in my own kitchen being treated like a guest who had misplaced her manners. I remember, I said. And I did. I remembered all of it. The night Michael canceled dinner because Vanessa said I seemed tired. The Thanksgiving when she moved me from the center of the table to the end near the folding chairs because the kids need more room. The way she once took a casserole dish from my hands and said, laughing lightly, "Careful, Evelyn. We don't need another accident." Another accident. I had dropped one glass. One. After that, every normal mistake became evidence. My age became her favorite witness. I picked up the bank statement and slid it into the pocket of my cardigan. Vanessa watched the movement. "What are you doing?" "Keeping it." "You might misplace it." "I won't." Her face changed then. Barely. But enough. A thin line formed beside her mouth. "I really think Michael should handle this." I looked at the kitchen around me. Frank's coffee mug still on the upper shelf because I could not bring myself to move it. The faded recipe card taped inside the cabinet door. The little dent in the baseboard from the year Michael rode his red tricycle indoors and knocked over a plant. I had protected this house through storms, sickness, grief, repairs, and loneliness. And now my daughter-in-law was telling me my son should handle my own missing money. "No," I said. The word was small. But it landed. Vanessa stared at me as if I had spoken in a language she did not expect me to know. "No," she repeated. I turned toward the sink and picked up the orange medication bottle. My hand shook slightly as I screwed the cap back on. I did not want her to see the tremor, but hiding it would have made it worse. So I let it be visible. Let her see age. Let her mistake it for weakness. "I'm going to the bank," I said. Vanessa stepped forward. "I can drive you." "No, Evelyn, don't be stubborn." I looked at her then. Really looked. Not as the woman my son loved. Not as the daughter-in-law I had tried to welcome. Not as the polished young wife who knew how to smile in photographs and say the right thing at church dinners. I looked at her as someone who had stood too close to my private papers, my passwords, my grief. "I still have my driver's license," I said. "And I still know the way." Her lips parted, but no words came out. That silence told me something. Not everything, but enough. I walked past her slowly, down the narrow hall toward my bedroom. Each step made the floorboards creak under my slippers. In the bedroom, the bed was neatly made, Frank's side still flatter than mine. On the dresser sat our wedding photo in a silver frame. I was 28 in that picture, wearing a simple dress my mother had altered by hand. Frank was smiling like he had just won something. I touched the frame. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Not because I had lost the money. Because somewhere along the way, I had let people make me feel foolish for protecting what he left behind. I changed into my navy blouse, the one with pearl buttons, and my good black slacks. I brushed my silver hair carefully. I put on lipstick. Not much. Just enough to remind myself that I was still here. When I returned to the kitchen, Vanessa was on her phone near the back door, speaking in a low voice. She stopped when she saw me. "I'll call you back," she said quickly. I picked up my purse from the chair. "Was that Michael?" Her smile returned, but it did not reach her eyes. "Just a work thing." Vanessa did not work on Fridays. I let the lie sit there. Some lies deserve space. They reveal more when no one rushes to cover them. I took my keys from the hook beside the door. Frank had carved that wooden key holder years ago in his garage workshop. A little crooked. A little rough. Solid. Like him. Vanessa followed me onto the porch. The September air was cool, carrying the smell of damp leaves and cut grass. Across the street, Mrs. Donnelly was bringing in her trash cans. She raised one hand to wave. I waved back. Normal. Everything had to look normal. That was how betrayal survived in families. It wore clean clothes. It smiled at neighbors. It used words like help and concern. "Evelyn," Vanessa said behind me. I paused by the car. Her voice softened. "I know this is scary, but you need to be careful who you talk to. Banks make mistakes. Older clients misunderstand things all the time. I don't want you making this worse." I opened the driver's door and looked back at her. There was the humiliation. Not shouted. Not dramatic. Just a quiet suggestion that I could not trust my own mind. I thought of Frank's voice. This is peace for your old age. I thought of Michael as a little boy with cereal on his chin, promising he would buy me a mansion someday. I thought of Vanessa's hand reaching for my statement. Then I got into the car. Before I closed the door, I said, "I'm not going to make it worse." Vanessa tilted her head. I started the engine. "I'm going to understand it." As I pulled out of the driveway, I saw her in the rearview mirror, standing perfectly still on my porch, phone already pressed to her ear. And for the first time that morning, I knew two things with absolute certainty. My money had not disappeared by accident. And Vanessa was not afraid of what I had found. She was afraid of what I might find next. The drive to First Community Bank should have taken 12 minutes. That morning it took nearly 20. Not because of traffic. Because every red light gave me another chance to think. And the more I thought, the less I liked what I was beginning to understand. The September sky stretched clear and pale above the town. School buses moved through neighborhoods. A man walked his golden retriever near the park. People carried coffee cups into office buildings. Life continued exactly as it always had. Meanwhile, I sat gripping the steering wheel of my 10-year-old Honda Accord, trying to understand how 6 months of withdrawals could happen without me noticing. Or perhaps a harder question. How had I become someone who could be robbed without immediately suspecting the people closest to me? I stopped at a red light and glanced at the passenger seat. The bank statement lay folded beside my purse. A simple piece of paper. Yet somehow it had changed everything. The light turned green. I drove on. The closer I got to the bank, the more memories surfaced. Not dramatic memories. Ordinary ones. The dangerous kind. The kinds you ignore because they seem too small to matter. 3 months ago, my electric bill had been late. That had never happened before. I remembered sitting at my kitchen table, staring at the notice. The amount wasn't huge. Just unexpected. I had blamed myself. Maybe I'd forgotten. Maybe I was getting distracted. Vanessa had found the notice while helping me organize paperwork. "Oh, Evelyn," she'd said gently, "you really need someone keeping track of these things." At the time I had been embarrassed. Now I felt something else. Anger. Not hot anger. Cold anger. The kind that arrives when confusion starts becoming clarity. I pulled into the bank parking lot and parked beneath a maple tree already turning orange. For a moment I stayed in the car. My hands rested on the steering wheel. I looked at the building. Frank and I had been banking there for almost 30 years. We opened our first savings account there. We refinanced the house there. We deposited Michael's college graduation checks there. The bank had witnessed almost every chapter of our adult lives. I wondered what it would reveal about this one. I took a deep breath and stepped out. Inside, the familiar scent of carpet cleaner and coffee greeted me. The lobby hadn't changed much over the years. The same framed photographs of local landmarks. The same rows of chairs. The same teller windows. For the first time all morning, I felt something close to relief. This place felt stable, predictable, unlike my home, unlike my family. A young teller smiled. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitaker." I smiled back. That surprised me. Apparently, even betrayal couldn't erase decades of good manners. "Good morning. I believe Helen is already here if you'd like to speak with her." Helen, the branch manager. She and Frank had always gotten along. They both loved gardening and spent far too much time discussing tomatoes. I nodded. "Thank you." A few moments later, Helen appeared from the hallway. She was in her early 60s, with silver blonde hair and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. The moment she saw me, her smile softened. "Evelyn." She stepped forward and squeezed my hand. "It's good to see you." "You too." Then she looked more carefully at my face. Her expression changed. "Is everything all right?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say yes. Part of me wanted to pretend this morning had never happened. But that was exactly how people got trapped. By protecting the comfort of others. "No," I said quietly. "It isn't." Helen led me into her office. The door closed behind us. Outside, I could hear faint conversations and ringing phones. Inside, everything felt strangely still. I placed the statement on her desk. "I need help understanding this." She adjusted her glasses and began reading. At first, her expression remained neutral. Then her eyebrows drew together. She read more carefully. Then she looked up. When did you notice this? This morning. And these transfers weren't authorized by you? No. Helen looked back down. A long silence followed. Not the comforting kind. The worrying kind. Finally, she turned her computer screen toward herself and began typing. The clicking of keys filled the room. I watched her face. Years of working with people had taught me something. Bad news often appears before it's spoken. And Helen was definitely seeing something. After several moments she stopped typing. Evelyn. Her voice had changed. My stomach tightened. What? She clicked another screen. Then another. Then another. I think we need to review your account history more carefully. The room suddenly felt warmer. Why? Helen looked at me. There are more transactions than what's shown on that statement. For a second I thought I had misheard her. What do you mean? She printed several pages. One after another. The printer hummed steadily. Each page seemed to increase the weight pressing against my chest. When she handed them to me, I immediately noticed the dates. Transfer. 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 Month after month. My hands started shaking again. Oh my God. The words escaped before I could stop them. Helen remained quiet. That worried me more than anything. Bank managers usually reassure people. Helen wasn't reassuring me. She was studying the records. Looking for something. Then she pointed to a section near the top. Evelyn. Does this email address belong to you? I looked down. The address printed beside my account profile wasn't mine. Not even close. I stared at it. A Gmail account I'd never seen before. The room seemed to tilt. No. Helen leaned back slowly. When was the last time you updated your online banking profile? I never did. Never. No. Frank had originally set everything up years ago. After he passed, I mostly used paper statements. Vanessa had encouraged online access. But I'd never personally changed anything. Helen folded her hands. Evelyn, according to our records, the primary contact email was changed approximately 6 months ago. My heart dropped. 6 months. The exact timeline. The same timeline as the missing money. The same timeline as Vanessa's sudden interest in helping me with finances. The same timeline as all those conversations about simplifying things. A cold sensation moved through my chest. Helen continued. The phone number connected to two-factor authentication was also updated.
Ist daher.
What does that mean? It means account verification messages were being sent somewhere else. The words landed like stones. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Because suddenly dozens of moments from the last several months began lining up in my memory. Vanessa asking to help organize passwords. Vanessa insisting paper statements were outdated. Vanessa volunteering to manage monthly payments. Vanessa reminding me that technology was confusing. One memory rose above all the others. 3 months ago, I had mentioned not receiving an account notification. Vanessa had smiled. Oh, banks mess those up all the time. At the time I believed her. Now I wondered if she'd already known exactly where those notifications were going. Helen watched me carefully. Evelyn. I looked up. Do you know who might have had access to your information? The answer arrived immediately. Too immediately. Vanessa. But saying her name felt impossible. Because once spoken aloud, suspicion would become reality. And reality had consequences. Not just for Vanessa. For Michael. My son. The little boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during thunderstorms. The teenager who cried when Frank taught him how to shave because he'd nicked himself. The young man who promised he'd always take care of me. The thought hurt more than the missing money. Because if Vanessa had done this, what did Michael know? I swallowed hard. I don't know. It was only half a lie. I knew who had access. I just didn't know how deep the betrayal went. Helen nodded slowly. Then she opened another file. The look on her face changed again. This time it wasn't concern. It was surprise.
A genuine surprise.
Evelyn. My pulse quickened. What now? She turned the screen slightly. I wasn't going to mention this until we finished reviewing everything. The pause felt endless. But I think you need to see it. I leaned forward. Helen clicked once. A new account appeared. An account I had never seen before. My name was on it. My social security number was attached to it. And according to the balance displayed on the screen, someone had been moving money into it. For months, I stared at the numbers, unable to breathe, unable to think, unable to understand why an account existed under my name that I had never opened. Then Helen said the sentence that changed everything. Evelyn, who is listed as the secondary authorized user on this account? My eyes moved to the bottom of the screen. I read the name once, then twice, then a third time, because surely it couldn't be true. But it was. And for the first time that day I began to fear that Vanessa wasn't acting alone. The name at the bottom of the account wasn't Vanessa's. It was Michael's. For several seconds I simply stared at the screen. My son. My only child. The boy whose first bicycle I still had photographs of. The man I had trusted more than anyone else in the world after Frank died. Listed as an authorized user on an account I had never opened. My throat tightened. There has to be a mistake, I whispered. Helen didn't answer immediately. That frightened me. People rush to reassure you when they believe you're wrong. Silence usually means they're trying to determine how much truth you're ready to hear. She turned the monitor slightly toward herself. I'm not saying Michael opened the account. The distinction felt important. And yet it wasn't comforting. But he is listed as an authorized user. I looked away from the screen. Outside the office window I could see part of the parking lot. A young mother was helping a little girl out of a minivan. The child was laughing. The sound drifted faintly through the glass. Normal life. Meanwhile, mine felt as if it were quietly cracking apart. How long? I asked. Helen clicked through several pages. This account was created a little over 5 months ago. 5 months. Again. Everything seemed to point back to the same period. The missing notifications. The transferred funds. The sudden changes to my account settings. Vanessa's growing involvement in my finances. Michael becoming strangely distant. The timeline fit together too neatly. Almost too neatly. I folded my hands in my lap to hide their shaking. Can you tell where the money came from? Helen nodded. Some of it originated from your retirement account. My stomach dropped. Some. She hesitated. Then she printed another page. There are also transfers from other sources. I took the paper. A few deposits came from Michael's checking account. Others came from somewhere else entirely. The numbers blurred for a moment. I blinked, looked again, and then something even stranger caught my attention. Monthly deposits. Regular deposits. Large enough to matter. Too large to ignore. What's this? Helen leaned forward. Those appear to be incoming. Transfers. From who? She checked the screen. I don't recognize the institution. I stared at the page. The account wasn't simply being used to drain my retirement savings. Money was also flowing into it, which made even less sense. If Vanessa was stealing from me, why move money into another account connected to my name? The question lingered in my mind. Something was missing. A piece of the puzzle I couldn't yet see. Helen studied me carefully. Evelyn, I need to ask something difficult. I nodded. Has anyone been helping manage your finances? There it was. The question. The one I'd been avoiding. I thought about Vanessa sitting at my kitchen table. Her laptop open. Her coffee cup beside mine. The way she gently corrected me whenever I forgot a password. The way she'd insisted paper records were outdated. The way she'd offered to make things easier. I remembered one particular afternoon nearly 4 months earlier. At the time it had seemed harmless. Now it felt different. Very different. I had been balancing my checkbook at the dining room table. Vanessa stopped by unexpectedly. Michael was traveling for work. She arrived carrying blueberry muffins from a bakery downtown. A thoughtful gesture. Or so I'd believed. You still do everything by hand? She'd asked, smiling. I laughed. It works. It also takes forever. I shrugged. I have time. Vanessa sat beside me. Close enough to see every page. Honestly, Evelyn, you should let me help. I remembered the warmth in her voice. The patience. The concern. At least that's what I thought it was. Back then. Now I wasn't so sure. I don't want to become a burden, I told her. Her expression had softened. Oh, you're not a burden. Then she added, We just worry about you. We. Not I. We. At the time the word sounded comforting. Today it sounded coordinated. I returned my attention to Helen. Yes. She nodded. Who? My daughter-in-law. Helen didn't look surprised. That bothered me. Not because she knew something. Because it suggested she'd seen situations like this before. Far too often. She folded her hands. How much access did she have? The answer arrived slowly. Painfully. More than I wanted to admit. She knew where I kept records. She knew my passwords. She knew my account numbers. She had access to my computer. She had helped set up online banking. She even knew where I stored spare checks. The realization made me feel physically ill. Not because I had trusted her. Because I had trusted her willingly. People like to believe betrayal only happens to naive people. That's not true. Betrayal happens to loving people. Trusting people. Lonely people. Especially lonely people. After Frank died, the house had become too quiet. The silence followed me everywhere. Into the kitchen. Into the laundry room. Into bed at night. Some days the only person who called was Vanessa. First I appreciated it. Maybe I appreciated it too much. I swallowed hard. She had access. Helen nodded slowly. Then she lowered her voice. Evelyn, I'm going to tell you something as your banker, and as someone who's known your family a long time. I waited. Don't confront anyone yet. The seriousness in her tone surprised me. Why not? Because we don't know enough. I looked at the papers. The unauthorized account. Michael's name. The missing money. The altered contact information. To me it already felt like enough. But Helen shook her head. No. She tapped the account summary. Something doesn't fit. I frowned. What do you mean? If someone wanted to steal from you, they usually hide the money. She pointed at the deposits. This account isn't hidden. I looked again. She was right. The account existed under my name, my social security number, my profile, my banking relationship. Why create something traceable? Unless the account served another purpose. A purpose I still didn't understand. The thought made my skin crawl. Helen continued. There's another thing. My pulse quickened. What? She turned back to the computer. The authorized user wasn't added first.
Esther daher.
What does that mean? It means whoever created the account initially registered someone else. The room went silent. I felt every beat of my heart. Someone else. Not Michael. Not me. Someone else. Who? I asked. Helen clicked through records. Then her eyes narrowed. For the first time that morning she seemed genuinely puzzled. Huh? What? She looked up. The records show the original authorized user was removed. A chill moved through me. Removed? Can you see the name? I'll need to request archived records. How long? A few days. Few days. Sounded like forever. I looked at the stack of documents. The pile seemed larger now. Heavier. Each page revealing another layer of uncertainty. Another layer of deception. I suddenly felt exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone had spent months quietly rewriting parts of my life while I wasn't looking. Helen seemed to notice. She softened her voice. When was the last time you and Michael had a real conversation? The question caught me off guard. I thought about it. Really thought about it. Not a quick phone call. Not a holiday dinner. Not discussing the weather or football scores. A real conversation. I couldn't remember. The realization hurt. More than any account balance. Michael called less after Frank died. Then even less after Vanessa began handling most family plans. At first I blamed his career. Then adulthood. Then distance. But now I wasn't sure. Maybe distance wasn't the result. Maybe it had been the strategy. A gradual one. So gradual I never noticed it happening. One canceled lunch. One missed Sunday dinner. One forgotten birthday call. One changed holiday plan. Until eventually I was no longer part of decisions. Only informed after they happened. Helen interrupted my thoughts. Evelyn. I blinked. Sorry. She offered a sympathetic smile. You don't have to figure everything out today. No. But I needed to start. Because for the first time since Frank died, I felt something stronger than grief. Suspicion. And suspicion changes everything. I gathered the documents into a neat stack. Years of library work had left me unable to tolerate disorder. Even now, even here, Helen handed me a business card. My direct number. I slipped it into my purse. If anyone contacts you about these accounts, call me first. I nodded. Then I stood. My knees felt older than usual. The office suddenly seemed smaller. The air heavier. As I reached for the door, Helen spoke again. Evelyn. Turned. There is one more thing. The expression on her face made my pulse spike immediately. What? She looked down at the screen. Then back at me. Yesterday someone called asking about your account activity. Every muscle in my body tightened. Who? I can't disclose names. The pause felt endless. But I can tell you this. I waited. Her voice lowered. The caller already knew about the account. The room seemed to stop moving. The caller already knew. Not suspected. Not wondered. Knew. Which meant someone was watching. Someone was checking. Someone was worried. And suddenly, standing in that small bank office, I realized something terrifying. The moment I walked through those doors this morning, someone may have already known I was asking questions. I sat in my car for nearly 10 minutes after leaving the bank. The engine was off. The documents rested on the passenger seat. And I couldn't bring myself to drive home. Someone had called the bank. Someone already knew about the account. Someone was worried enough to check. The thought repeated itself over and over as I stared through the windshield. Across the parking lot, a teenager loaded groceries into the trunk of an old pickup truck. A woman pushed a shopping cart toward her SUV. Life moved forward with its usual rhythm. Mine felt suspended, like a photograph trapped between two moments. For the first time since Frank died, I wished I could call him. Not because he would solve the problem, because he would have seen something I missed. Frank noticed things. Tiny things. The kinds of details most people overlook. A loose fence board. A dripping faucet. A forced smile. A lie. Especially a lie. I looked down at my wedding ring. I still wore it. For years later. The gold had thinned slightly from decades of use. Frank used to joke that the ring was wearing out because I never stopped working. I smiled sadly at the memory. Then another memory surfaced. One I hadn't thought about in years. 23 years ago. Michael was 16. He had borrowed my car without permission and backed it into a mailbox. Not a major accident. No one was hurt. But when Frank discovered the damage, he didn't yell. He simply sat Michael down at the kitchen table. I remembered standing near the sink while they talked. You made a mistake, Frank said calmly. Michael stared at the floor. I'm sorry. I know. Are you mad? Frank shook his head. No. Michael looked confused. Frank leaned forward. You know what disappoints me? What? If you lie about it. The silence that followed had lasted forever. Then Michael admitted everything. Every detail. Even things Frank hadn't known. Because Michael loved his father. And because Frank had taught him that honesty mattered more than perfection. The memory hurt now. Because the Michael sitting in my memories felt very far away from the Michael who barely returned my calls. I started the car. This time I drove home. The entire way I kept thinking about timelines. 5 months. 6 months. The changes had all started around the same period. Not immediately after Frank's death. Not last year. Recently. Something had shifted. Something had changed. I just didn't know what. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the afternoon sun hung low over the neighborhood. Vanessa's car was gone. That surprised me. Usually she stayed longer. Especially after offering help. I carried the documents inside. The house felt unusually quiet. Not peaceful. Watchful. As though the walls themselves were waiting. I locked the front door behind me. Then I carried everything into the dining room. Frank's dining room. At least that was how I still thought of it. The oak table occupied the center of the room. Scratches from decades of family dinners marked its surface. Michael's homework. Birthday cakes. Thanksgiving dinners. Christmas mornings. Life. I spread the documents across the table. Page after page. Transaction histories. Account summaries. transfer records, email changes, authorization logs. The story was beginning to emerge, but only in fragments. I sat down slowly. The afternoon light filtered through the windows. Dust drifted lazily through the beams. Everything looked exactly the same, yet somehow nothing felt the same anymore. My eyes landed on an old family photograph hanging on the far wall. It had been taken 12 years earlier. Before Frank's heart attack. Before distance. Before suspicion. We were standing on a beach in North Carolina. Frank's arm around my shoulders. Michael smiling. Vanessa beside him. Everyone looked happy. I studied Vanessa's face, searching for signs, warnings, anything. But photographs never tell the truth. They only preserve appearances. The doorbell rang. I jumped. The sound startled me enough that several papers slipped from my hands. My pulse immediately quickened. For one irrational moment I wondered if someone from the bank had followed me. Then I laughed at myself. Quietly, nervously. The second ring came. I stood and walked toward the front door. Through the glass panel I recognized Michael's truck. My stomach tightened instantly. Michael. Not Vanessa. Michael. I opened the door. He stood on the porch with his hands in his pockets. 42 years old. Tall like Frank. Same dark eyes. Same stubborn jaw. The resemblance still caught me off guard sometimes. Hey, Mom. His smile seemed normal. Too normal. Michael. He glanced past me into the house. Can I come in? For a second I considered saying no. Then I stepped aside. Of course. He entered. The familiar scent of his cologne followed him. A scent I'd smelled for years. Today it felt strange. Almost unfamiliar. Michael walked toward the kitchen. Everything okay? There it was. The question. The same question people ask when they already suspect the answer. I watched him carefully. Why wouldn't it be? He opened the refrigerator, grabbed a bottle of water, avoided eye contact. Because that's what Michael always did when uncomfortable. He'd been doing it since childhood. Another detail Frank had always noticed. Vanessa said you seemed upset this morning. Of course she had. The speed of it bothered me. She'd contacted him immediately. Maybe even before I left for the bank. I kept my voice calm. I had some questions about my finances. Michael unscrewed the bottle cap. Oh, just one word. Nothing else. No curiosity. No concern. No follow-up questions. Just, oh. The reaction felt wrong. Very wrong. I moved toward the kitchen table. Michael remained standing, drinking water, looking everywhere except at me. Realization began forming. Small. Uncomfortable. What if Michael already knew enough to avoid asking questions? The thought settled heavily in my chest. I decided to test him. Not accuse. Test. Frank used to do that. Ask simple questions and watch carefully. People often revealed themselves without realizing it. I went to the bank today. Michael nodded. Okay. No surprise. No interest. No why. Nothing. I continued. They found some unusual transactions. For the first time something flickered across his face. Gone almost immediately. But I saw it. A reaction. Small. Yet unmistakable. His hand tightened around the water bottle. Then relaxed. What kind of transactions? Finally. A question. I answered carefully. Money transfers. Michael looked down. Not at me. At the kitchen floor. My heart sank. Because guilt rarely looks dramatic. Most of the time it looks exactly like this. A person suddenly becoming fascinated by the floor. I see. 3 words. No more. No less. I remembered Helen's warning. Don't confront anyone yet. So I didn't. Instead I watched. Listened. Waited. Michael cleared his throat. Mom. Yes. You know sometimes these things aren't what they seem. The sentence hit harder than I expected. Not because of what he said. Because of how quickly he said it. Almost rehearsed. Prepared. As though he'd already been thinking about explanations. My pulse quickened. Maybe. He nodded eagerly. Exactly. Exactly. Not tell me more. Not. Are you okay? Not. How much money? Just exactly. I suddenly felt tired. Not physically. Emotionally. The kind of exhaustion that comes from realizing someone you love may not be standing where you thought they were. Michael sat down across from me. For a moment neither of us spoke. The clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a dog barked somewhere down the street. Finally Michael sighed. Mom. The word sounded heavy. I worry about you sometimes. There it was. The phrase. The same phrase Vanessa used. The same language. The same framing. Not concern. Positioning. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Worry about me? Michael rubbed the back of his neck. You've been under a lot of stress. Everyone is. You're alone. The word lingered between us. Alone. Not independent. Not capable. Alone. I thought of all the years I'd managed after Frank died. The repairs. The bills. The insurance claims. The taxes. The doctor's appointments. The grief. Alone. And yet somehow now they spoke about me as if I needed supervision. Michael continued. Sometimes people make mistakes. I looked directly into his eyes. What kind of mistakes? For the first time he looked uncomfortable. Real discomfort. The kind he couldn't hide. I don't know. Yes, you do. The thought flashed through my mind immediately. You know exactly what kind. But I kept silent. Because silence was revealing more than confrontation ever could. Michael glanced toward the dining room. His eyes landed on the documents spread across the table. His expression changed. Only slightly. But enough. Fear. Not panic. Fear. The kind people feel when something they hoped would remain hidden is suddenly visible. My pulse hammered. Because at that moment I knew one thing for certain. Michael recognized those papers. He knew exactly what they were. And whatever role he played in this story, it was much bigger than he wanted me to believe. After Michael left, I sat alone at the dining room table until long after sunset. The documents remained spread before me. The bank records. The transaction histories. The account I had never opened. Michael's name. The altered email address. The missing money. But somehow none of those things occupied my thoughts as much as the look on my son's face. Not anger. Not outrage. Not confusion. Recognition. That was what haunted me. Recognition. As if he had seen those papers before. As if he had known they existed. As if my discovery wasn't news. Only a problem. The house had grown dark around me before I finally noticed. I switched on the lamp above the sideboard. Warm yellow light filled the room. For a moment, the dining room looked exactly as it always had. Comfortable. Familiar. Safe. Then I noticed Frank's empty chair. And everything hurt again. I stood and walked toward it. My fingers rested on the worn wooden back. Frank always sat there. Every meal. Every holiday. Every ordinary Tuesday night. His place remained untouched. People had suggested moving it. Redecorating. Starting fresh. I never did. Some grief doesn't need fixing. It only needs space. I closed my eyes. And suddenly I wasn't 70 years old anymore. I was 24. Standing in a tiny apartment kitchen with peeling wallpaper and second-hand furniture. Frank had just come home from work. Michael wasn't born yet. We had exactly $43 in our checking account. And somehow we felt rich. Not because of money. Because we had each other. A small smile touched my lips. Frank used to make impossible situations feel temporary. That's what I missed most. Not his income. Not his strength. His steadiness. His certainty that problems could be solved. I opened my eyes. The dining room returned. Empty. Quiet. The way it had been for 4 years. I moved to the kitchen and poured myself a cup of tea. The kettle whistled softly. The familiar ritual calmed me. At least a little. I carried the mug back to the table and looked at the photograph hanging on the wall. Michael at 8 years old. Front tooth missing. Little league uniform too large for his skinny frame. I remembered that season perfectly. Frank had been working overtime. Money was tight again. The baseball registration fee wasn't huge. But it was enough to hurt. We paid it anyway. Because that's what parents do. You sacrifice quietly. So your child never realizes something had to be sacrificed. I sat down and wrapped both hands around the warm mug. The memories kept coming. Not because I wanted them. Because once doubt enters your heart, it starts searching through the past. Looking for answers. Looking for clues. Looking for the moment everything changed. I remembered Michael's senior year of high school. The acceptance letter from Ohio State. The excitement. The pride. The fear. College was expensive. Far more expensive than Frank and I could comfortably afford. One night, after Michael went to bed, I found Frank sitting at this very table. Stacks of papers spread before him. Scholarship applications. Financial aid forms. Loan information. I sat beside him. How bad is it? Frank sighed. We'll manage. That wasn't an answer. I waited. Finally he looked at me. We might need to use some of the retirement fund. The words hit hard. Not because I disagreed. Because I knew how much that retirement account meant. We had built it little by little. $10.
$20. $50.
Year after year. Sacrifice after sacrifice. It represented security. The future. The reward at the end of decades of work. Yet neither of us hesitated. Not really. Because Michael was our son. A week later I sold several pieces of jewelry my mother had left me. Nothing extravagant. A bracelet. A pair of earrings. A necklace I rarely wore. The money covered books and tuition expenses. Michael never knew. We never told him. Parents aren't supposed to keep score. At least that's what I believed then. I wasn't so sure anymore. The tea cooled. The house remained silent. And memory after memory surfaced. Michael's first apartment. Frank and I helping him move furniture. Michael's wedding. The down payment assistance we provided when he and Vanessa bought their first home. The weekends I spent babysitting when their schedules became hectic. The holidays I cooked. The birthdays I organized. The countless times I said yes without hesitation. Not because I expected repayment. Because I loved him. Love was never supposed to be transactional. But respect? Respect should have been. My eyes drifted toward another photograph. Michael and Vanessa on their wedding day. She looked radiant. Happy. Young. I remembered standing in the church reception hall watching them dance. Frank leaned toward me. She's ambitious. I laughed. That's not a crime. No. His eyes remained on Vanessa. But ambition can be dangerous when people stop being grateful. At the time I dismissed the comment. Frank liked Vanessa. Mostly. He simply observed things more carefully than I did. Now I wondered how much he had seen. The thought led me somewhere unexpected. The retirement account. The trust. The money. The strange account. A memory surfaced suddenly. Sharp. Specific. About 2 years before Frank died. We were sitting on the back porch after dinner. Summer evening. Fireflies blinking across the yard. Michael and Vanessa had just left after Sunday dinner. Frank was unusually quiet. I noticed immediately. What are you thinking about? He looked toward the driveway. Michael trusts too easily. I laughed. That sounds familiar. Frank smiled. Then his expression changed. Promise me something. My stomach tightened. What? If anything ever feels wrong after I'm gone. He paused. Check everything yourself. I frowned. Frank. I'm serious. The tone in his voice surprised me. What are you worried about? He hesitated. For a long moment. Then shook his head. Maybe nothing. But it wasn't nothing. I could see that now. Something had concerned him. Something enough to make him say those words. And somehow I'd forgotten. Or perhaps I didn't want to remember. A loud vibration interrupted my thoughts. My phone. The screen lit up beside my teacup. Vanessa. My chest tightened immediately. I stared at the name. She rarely called at night. Especially not directly. Usually communication came through Michael. The phone continued vibrating. I considered letting it ring. Instead I answered. Hello. A brief pause. Then Vanessa's voice. Warm. Polite. Perfect. Evelyn. The sound of my name immediately put me on guard. Not because of what she said. Because of how carefully she said it. How are you feeling? Feeling. Not. What did the bank say? Not. Did you figure anything out? Just feeling. As though my emotions mattered more than the facts. I'm fine. Good. The pause that followed felt deliberate. Then, Michael said you seemed upset. Of course he had. I stared at the wedding photograph. The smiling faces. The carefully preserved illusion.
I'm managing.
Another pause. Then Vanessa laughed softly. Not mockingly. Not openly. Just enough. You know how stress can affect memory. The words landed like ice water. There it was. Again. Memory. Confusion. Age. The narrative she kept returning to. A narrative she seemed very invested in. I kept my voice calm. What exactly are you trying to say? Silence. Brief. Careful. Then. Nothing. A lie. Obvious. Transparent. Dangerous. Vanessa continued. I just don't want you worrying yourself unnecessarily. I looked down at the transaction reports. Spread across the table. Thousands of dollars. Months of activity. Hidden accounts. Unauthorized changes. And she called it unnecessary worry. For the first time, anger rose inside me. Not explosive anger. Not loud anger. The kind that settles quietly. The kind that becomes resolve. I took a slow breath. I'm sure. Good. She sounded relieved. Far too relieved. Then she added something that made every alarm bell inside me ring. We should probably discuss long-term planning soon. My grip tightened around the phone. Long-term planning. Not finances. Not banking. Long-term planning. The phrase felt rehearsed. Prepared. Like a topic already discussed somewhere else. Without me. What kind of planning? Another pause. Then, oh, nothing urgent. Which meant exactly the opposite. I knew that much. We'll talk later. The call ended. I lowered the phone slowly. The house felt quieter than ever. But now another realization had joined all the others. Vanessa wasn't trying to protect me. She was managing me. Managing my information. Managing my perception. Managing access to decisions. And perhaps, managing my future. I looked at Frank's empty chair. Then at the papers spread across the table. Then at the photograph of Michael and Vanessa. The pieces weren't fitting together yet. Not completely. But for the first time I could see the shape of something larger. Something beyond stolen money. Something beyond hidden accounts. And deep down I knew one thing. The retirement account was not the end of their plan. It was only the beginning. I barely slept that night. Not because I was afraid. Fear had come and gone already. What remained was something colder. Awareness. The kind that changes how you see everything. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I found myself standing in the hallway outside my bedroom, staring at the framed family photographs lining the wall. The house was silent. The old grandfather clock in the living room ticked steadily. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed somewhere in the distance. Ordinary sounds. Yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. I studied each photograph carefully. Michael at 10. Michael at 16. Michael graduating college. Michael standing beside Vanessa on their wedding day. For years those pictures represented memories. Now they felt like evidence. Not evidence of wrongdoing. Evidence of change. A slow transformation I hadn't noticed while it was happening. Perhaps because mothers rarely want to see it. We spend decades searching for signs our children are happy. Not signs they're drifting away. I touched the edge of one frame. The glass felt cool beneath my fingers. Then I returned to bed. But sleep never really came. Only fragments. Restless thoughts. Questions without answers. By morning I felt exhausted. Yet strangely focused. The way people become focused when the truth starts revealing itself. I made coffee. Strong. Stronger than usual. Then I carried my mug into the dining room and spread the bank documents across the table once more. The rising sun illuminated the pages. Numbers. Dates. Transfers. Accounts. Patterns. The story was hiding somewhere among them. I just needed to find it. I spent nearly 2 hours reviewing every page. First nothing stood out. Then something did. A date. I looked closer. Then another. Then another. The transfers often occurred within 24 hours of specific events. Doctor appointments. Utility payments. Insurance withdrawals. Moments when I was distracted. Moments when I wasn't paying attention. The realization made me sit back in my chair. That wasn't random. That was strategy. Someone knew my routines. Someone understood when I was least likely to notice. Someone close. Very close. The phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID. Helen. Immediately I answered. Helen. Good morning, Evelyn. Something in her voice told me she had news. Important news.
Isetstrete.
What happened? I received some archived records. My pulse quickened. The original authorized user. The name we'd been waiting for. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then Helen continued. And I think you should come in. The seriousness in her tone erased any thought of discussing this over the phone. I'll be there in 30 minutes. I hung up and immediately reached for my purse. Then paused. Thought struck me. If someone already knew I had visited the bank, would they notice a second visit? Probably. The realization unsettled me. But not enough to stop me. Not anymore. I grabbed my keys. As I stepped outside, cool morning air greeted me. Leaves drifted across the driveway. Autumn was arriving. Frank always loved this time of year. He used to spend Saturdays cleaning gutters and pretending it was enjoyable. I smiled despite myself. Then drove toward the bank. Helen met me at her office door. She looked concerned. More concerned than yesterday. That immediately worried me. She closed the office door behind us. Then handed me a printed document. Read this. I looked down. The archived records detailed changes made to the mysterious account. Creation date. Access changes. Authorization updates. My eyes moved quickly across the page. Then stopped. A name. Not Michael. Not Vanessa. Third person. I frowned. Who is this? Helen folded her arms. That's exactly what I've been trying to determine. The name meant nothing to me. Absolutely nothing. I'd never heard it before. Never met anyone by that name. Never written a check to them. Never discussed finances with them. Yet somehow they'd been connected to an account under my name. The confusion deepened. Why would a stranger be attached to my account? Helen shook her head. I don't know. Neither did I. And that bothered me. Because until now, the story felt relatively straightforward. Vanessa. Michael. The missing money. Now another person had entered the picture. Someone completely unknown. I continued reading. Then noticed something else. An address. The original authorized user's mailing address. My stomach tightened. Not because I recognized it. Because I did. Sort of. The street name felt familiar. Very familiar. I stared at it, trying to remember. Then suddenly it clicked. The address wasn't random. It belonged to an office complex. An office complex I'd visited before. Years ago. With Frank. My heart began beating faster. Helen. She looked up. I know this address. You do. I nodded slowly. Not the person. I pointed at the page. But the building. Helen leaned forward. Where from? I swallowed. The memory was old. But clear. Frank had once met with an estate attorney there. About 5 years before his death. At the time I hadn't thought much of it. Retirement planning. Estate documents. Trust arrangements. The sort of things responsible people handle. But now? Now the connection felt significant. Very significant. Helen's expression changed. You think it's related? I don't know. And that was the truth. But for the first time I felt as though Frank might somehow still be part of this story. The thought gave me chills. Helen clicked through additional records. Then stopped. A moment later she turned the monitor toward me. Evelyn. The concern had returned. What? Look at this. I leaned closer. The screen displayed account access logs. Dates. Times. Locations. My eyes scanned the entries. Then froze. Several access attempts had originated from my own house. That wasn't surprising. What was surprising were the timestamps. Midday. Weekdays. Times I was usually out. Doctor appointments. Church activities. Grocery shopping. Moments when the house sat empty. Or should have sat empty. I stared at the screen. My pulse accelerated. Someone had been accessing the account from inside my home. Repeatedly. Helen spoke quietly. Do many people have keys to your house? The answer arrived too quickly. Too easily. Michael. Vanessa. And no one else. I suddenly felt sick. Not because I lacked evidence. Because the evidence kept pointing in the same direction. Again. And again. And again. The room seemed smaller. The air heavier. I rubbed my forehead, trying to think clearly, trying to remain objective, trying not to become the suspicious old woman everyone already seemed eager to believe I was becoming. Helen must have noticed my expression. Evelyn. I looked up. You don't have to figure everything out today. I gave a tired laugh. It feels like I do. She nodded sympathetically, then reached into a folder. There's something else. Of course there was. At this point, there always seemed to be something else. She slid another page across the desk. This one wasn't a banking record. It was a document request, submitted 3 months earlier. I frowned. What is this? Helen's eyes remained fixed on me. A request for information regarding power of attorney documentation. For a moment, I didn't understand. Then I did. And every ounce of warmth drained from my body. Power of attorney. The legal authority to make decisions for someone else. Financial decisions. Property decisions. Medical decisions. Life decisions. I looked at Helen. Slowly. Carefully. Was it approved? No. Relief flooded through me. Briefly. Then disappeared. Because approval wasn't the point. The request was. Someone had explored the possibility. Someone had taken the first step. Someone had considered gaining legal control over my affairs. The realization was horrifying. Not because it had succeeded. Because it had been attempted. I stared at the page. Unable to speak. Unable to breathe. Unable to look away. Then I noticed something handwritten near the bottom. A note. Small. Almost insignificant. Except it wasn't. Because beside the request was a name. Not Michael. Not the mysterious stranger. Vanessa. My hands tightened around the paper. For several seconds the room disappeared. The bank. Helen. The office. Everything faded. All I could see was Vanessa standing in my kitchen. Smiling. Offering help. Talking about simplifying things. Talking about long-term planning. Talking about concern. Concern. The word suddenly felt disgusting. Evelyn. Helen's voice sounded far away. I looked up. Slowly. Carefully. Because I already knew one thing with absolute certainty. The money had never been the real goal. The money was only the first step. And for the first time I began to understand what Vanessa might truly be after. I drove home from the bank in complete silence. No radio. No music. No news. Just the sound of the tires rolling over the pavement and the steady beating of my heart. Vanessa's name kept appearing in my mind. Not because I wanted it to. Because the evidence kept leading back to her. The power of attorney inquiry. The altered account information. The access logs from my house. The constant conversations about simplifying my life. Long-term planning. Managing things. Helping. Always helping. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. At 70 years old, I'd learned that truly dangerous. People rarely announce themselves. They don't arrive wearing black hats and wicked smiles. They arrive carrying muffins. They offer rides to doctor's appointments. They tell everyone they're worried about you. And by the time you realize what's happening, half the world believes they're the hero. I pulled into my driveway shortly after noon. The house sat exactly as I'd left it. Quiet. Still. Familiar. Yet every time I looked at it now, a new question appeared. Who had been inside while I was gone? Who had sat at my dining room table? Who had opened my mail? Who had used my computer? And most importantly, who believed they had the right? The moment I stepped inside, I noticed something unusual. An envelope resting on the entryway table. I froze. I hadn't left one there. The envelope was cream-colored. Unsealed. My name written neatly across the front. Not printed. Handwritten. I set my purse down slowly, then picked it up. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. No signature. No explanation. Just a short handwritten note. Call me before you trust anyone. Beneath the message was a phone number. Nothing else. I stared at it. For a full minute. My first instinct was fear. My second was curiosity. My third was something unexpected. Hope. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, someone seemed to know more than I did. I carried the note into the kitchen and sat down. The handwriting wasn't familiar. Neither was the number. I turned the paper over. Nothing. No clues. No names. No indication of who had left it. The front door had been locked when I arrived, which meant whoever left it either had access to the house or had slipped it through the mail slot. Neither possibility made me comfortable. I looked at the clock. 12:37 p.m. Then back at the note. Finally, I picked up my phone and dialed. The call connected after 2 rings. A woman answered. Evelyn. My heart skipped. She knew my name. Who is this? A brief pause. Then, my name is Linda Dawson. The name meant nothing to me. I don't believe we've met. We haven't. Her voice sounded cautious, almost nervous, as though she'd spent a long time debating whether to call me or leave that note. Then how do you know me? Silence. Then, I knew Frank. Every muscle in my body tightened. Frank. The mention of his name still had power, even after 4 years. How? Another pause. I worked with his attorney. The room seemed to narrow. My pulse quickened immediately. The office building. The estate planning meeting. The mysterious address from the archived records. Suddenly everything felt connected. I think we need to talk, Linda said. I stared at the note. About what? The answer came quietly. About what Frank was afraid of. The words hit me harder than any bank statement. Because deep down, I already knew Frank had been worried about something. That conversation on the porch. The warning he'd given me years ago. The retirement account. The trust. The estate planning. None of it felt accidental anymore. When? I asked. Today. My pulse accelerated. Where? A cafe on Elm Street. I knew it immediately. Small. Quiet. Usually occupied by retirees and remote workers. Safe. Public. I'll be there. The call ended. I remained seated for several moments. Thinking. Processing. Trying to decide whether this was a mistake or a breakthrough. Eventually I stood. Changed clothes. Brushed my hair. Applied a little lipstick. The same routine I'd followed for years. Not because appearance mattered. Because routine creates stability. And stability was becoming increasingly valuable. 30 minutes later, I arrived at the cafe. A bell chimed as I entered. The smell of coffee and baked bread filled the air. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers. The lunch crowd was light. I immediately spotted her. A woman in her late 60s seated near the back window. Gray hair. Navy sweater. Reading glasses. When she saw me, she stood. Evelyn. I nodded. Linda. For a moment we simply looked at one another. Evaluating. Measuring. Determining whether trust was possible. Then she gestured toward the empty chair. Thank you for coming. I sat down. Who are you? Linda smiled sadly. A fair question. She folded her hands. I worked for Martin Hayes. The name immediately triggered recognition. Martin Hayes. Frank's estate attorney. The man who handled our wills. Our trust. Most of our retirement planning. I hadn't spoken to him since Frank's funeral. He retired 3 years ago. Linda nodded. I know. My pulse quickened. Then why are you contacting me? Her expression grew serious. Because before he retired, Martin asked me to keep an eye on something. The words settled heavily between us. What? She hesitated, as though choosing her next sentence carefully. Then, you.
Ist daher.
Not understanding. Not yet. Linda continued. Frank was worried. Again. That word. Worried. It seemed everyone knew Frank had concerns. Everyone except me. What exactly was he worried about? Linda glanced around the cafe, ensuring nobody was listening, then leaned forward. He believed someone might eventually try to gain control of your finances. A chill spread through my body, not because of the statement, because of how calmly she said it, as though it wasn't speculation, as though it had been discussed, planned for, expected. I felt suddenly cold. Who? Linda shook her head. He never named anyone. Disappointment hit immediately. But he suspected something. I leaned forward. What? She sighed. Frank noticed changes. The same phrase I'd been repeating to myself for days. Changes. Distance. Behavior. Patterns. What kind of changes? Linda looked directly into my eyes. The way people treated you. For several seconds I couldn't speak. Because somehow that hurt more than missing money. Not the financial betrayal. The emotional one. The slow erosion of respect. The gradual shift from person to burden. Linda continued quietly. He thought you were becoming isolated. I remembered missed invitations. Canceled plans. Family dinners that somehow stopped happening. Phone calls that grew shorter. Birthdays acknowledged by text instead of visits. The memories came flooding back. One after another. None dramatic. Each painful. He believed someone was positioning themselves. My pulse quickened. For what? Linda didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her purse. Then placed a sealed envelope on the table. The sight of it made my stomach tighten. Frank left this with Martin. I stared at it. Unable to move. Unable to breathe. My husband's handwriting was visible on the front. Even after 4 years, I recognized it instantly. Strong. Neat. Steady. The handwriting of a man who planned ahead. The handwriting of a man who loved me. Linda pushed the envelope toward me. He instructed that it only be given to you if certain things happened. I looked up. What things? Her answer barely rose above a whisper. If someone ever tried to take control of your life. The cafe suddenly felt very quiet. The world seemed to disappear. All I could see was the envelope. Frank's handwriting. Frank's warning. Frank's voice echoing across years. And for the first time since this began, I realized I might not be uncovering a crime. I might be uncovering a plan that Frank had anticipated long before any of us knew it existed. For several seconds I couldn't touch the envelope. I simply stared at it. Frank's handwriting. My name. Nothing more. The sight of it felt almost unreal. 4 years. 4 years since I'd heard his voice. 4 years since I'd watched paramedics wheel him out of our backyard while I stood frozen on the porch. 4 years since the world I'd known ended. And somehow here he was again. Waiting for me. Through a simple white envelope. Linda didn't rush me. She sat quietly across the table, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The cafe around us faded into background noise. The low murmur of conversations. The hiss of the espresso machine. The clinking of dishes. Everything felt distant. My fingers trembled as I finally picked up the envelope. The paper felt worn. Old. Like it had spent years waiting inside a file cabinet somewhere. Waiting for this moment. Waiting for me. I traced Frank's handwriting gently. Then looked at Linda. When did he write this? About 18 months before he passed. My heart tightened. That long ago. Which meant whatever concerned him had existed before his death. Long before the missing money. Long before the mysterious account. Long before I noticed anything was wrong. I swallowed hard. Then carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded letter. No legal language. No complicated instructions. Just Frank's handwriting covering both sides of the page. My vision blurred immediately. Not because I couldn't read it. Because suddenly I could hear his voice. I took a deep breath. And began. My dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, then something has happened that I prayed never would. First, before anything else, I need you to remember something. You are stronger than you think. You always have been. You were stronger than me the day Michael was born. Stronger than me when we lost your mother. Stronger than me during every difficult year we've faced together. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Especially not now. I stopped reading. My eyes filled with tears. Frank always did that. Even from beyond the grave. He always knew exactly what I needed to hear. Linda quietly handed me a napkin. I smiled weakly. Then continued. Over the past few years, I've noticed things that concern me. Nothing dramatic. Nothing I can prove. Just patterns. And sometimes patterns matter more than proof. I've noticed decisions being made around you instead of with you. I've noticed people speaking for you when you're perfectly capable of speaking for yourself. I've noticed an increasing interest in our finances, particularly finances that don't belong to anyone but us. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But if I'm not, I need you to know something important. The greatest threat to a person's independence is rarely force. It's persuasion. People convince you that they're helping. People convince you that they're protecting you. People convince you that they're acting in your best interest. And before you realize what's happened, you've handed over the keys to your own life. I stopped again. A chill moved through my body, because every sentence felt painfully familiar. Too familiar. The words described exactly what had been happening. Not suddenly. Gradually. Over years. I continued reading. If someone is trying to take control, don't argue. Don't panic. Don't announce what you know. Observe. Listen. Be patient. The truth always reveals itself eventually. And remember this. Anyone who truly loves you will want you to remain independent for as long as possible. Anyone who loves power will want dependence. Know the difference. I lowered the letter. My hands were shaking. Not from grief. From recognition. Because Frank had seen it. Years ago. Before I did. Not the details. Not the missing money. But the direction things were moving. The slow shift. The subtle repositioning. The erosion of independence disguised as concern. I looked up at Linda. Why didn't anyone tell me? She sighed softly. Because Frank specifically asked us not to.
Ster daher.
What? He believed warning you too early would make you dismiss it. A sad smile crossed her face. He knew you. I laughed despite myself. A short broken laugh. That sounds like Frank. It does. For a moment we sat in silence. Then Linda reached into her purse again. My stomach tightened immediately. Another envelope. This one much thicker. She placed it on the table. What is that? Something Martin Hayes instructed me to release only if the letter was ever delivered. My pulse quickened. Inside were copies of legal documents, trust paperwork, estate planning records, amendments, financial directives. I recognized some, others I'd never seen before. Then one page caught my attention. A trust provision, added less than a year before Frank died. I frowned. What is this? Linda pointed to a paragraph. I read carefully, then read it again. The meaning hit me slowly, then all at once. The trust contained a protective clause. Any individual found to have manipulated, coerced, or improperly influenced me for financial gain could be legally removed as a beneficiary. The room seemed to tilt. I looked at Linda. Frank added this? She nodded. Personally. My heartbeat accelerated. The clause was powerful. Very powerful. But that wasn't what shocked me most. It was why he'd added it. Because somewhere deep down, Frank had anticipated this possibility. The realization was overwhelming. I looked down at the paperwork again, and that's when I noticed another name. The same mysterious name from the bank records. The unknown authorized user. My eyes widened. Wait. Linda immediately noticed. What? I pointed. This name. Her expression changed. Recognition. Finally. You've seen it before. Linda hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. She knew exactly who it was. And she didn't want to say it. Not yet. My pulse hammered. Who is this person? For a long moment she remained silent. Then finally, a private investigator. I blinked. What? A retired investigator. Nothing about this conversation felt real anymore. Power of attorney requests. Hidden accounts. Trust protections. Now a private investigator.
Ster daher.
Why would Frank hire a private investigator? Linda's expression softened. Because he wasn't trying to protect money. The answer surprised me. What was he trying to protect? She looked directly into my eyes. You. The simplicity of the answer hurt more than anything else. Because it reminded me exactly who Frank had been. Not a wealthy man. Not a powerful man. Just a husband who spent 40 years trying to make sure I was safe. Linda continued. About 2 years before he passed, Frank became concerned. About Vanessa? She shook her head. No. The answer stunned me. Not Vanessa. Then who? Linda folded her hands. Carefully. Deliberately. Then she said something that completely changed the direction of the story. At first, Frank's concerns weren't about Vanessa. My pulse accelerated. If not Vanessa. She took a deep breath. They were about Michael. The words landed like a physical blow.
Hystère daher.
Unable to speak. Unable to move. Because in all my fears, in all my suspicions, in all my worst imaginings, I had still been hoping Michael was simply manipulated. Weak. Passive. Blind. But not the source. Not the beginning. Not Frank's original concern. Linda saw the shock on my face. And quietly added, Vanessa entered the picture later. The cafe suddenly felt much smaller. The walls closer. The air heavier. Because for the first time since this began, I realized I might have been asking the wrong question. Maybe the real mystery wasn't what Vanessa wanted. Maybe the real mystery was what had happened to my son. And deep down, I knew the answer waiting ahead was going to hurt far more than anything I'd discovered so far. I didn't go home immediately after leaving the cafe. I couldn't. The conversation with Linda had left me feeling as though someone had quietly shifted the foundation beneath my feet. For days I had focused on Vanessa, the missing money, the power of attorney inquiry, the manipulation, the control. Now another possibility stood in front of me. Frank's original concern hadn't been Vanessa. It had been Michael. Even thinking the words felt disloyal, like speaking against my own child. I parked beside a small park near the river and sat there for nearly an hour. Children played on the swings. An elderly couple walked hand in hand along the path. The woman occasionally reached over to straighten her husband's collar. The simple tenderness of the gesture nearly broke my heart. Because suddenly I missed Frank with an intensity one hadn't felt in years. Not the grief. The partnership. The certainty that someone stood beside me. The certainty that someone saw things the same way I did. I closed my eyes and remembered another conversation. About 3 years before Frank died, Michael and Vanessa had come for dinner. Lasagna. Garlic bread.
Chocolate pie.
An ordinary family evening. At least it seemed ordinary at the time. Halfway through dinner, Michael mentioned an investment opportunity. Some business venture. Some partnership. Some deal involving friends. I barely remembered the details. What I remembered was Frank's reaction. Quiet. Reserved. Watchful. After they left, I asked him what was wrong. He stood at the kitchen sink rinsing plates. Michael worries me. The memory returned with startling clarity. I remembered drying dishes beside him. Why? Frank didn't answer immediately. Finally he said, he keeps looking for shortcuts. At the time I dismissed it. Lots of people looked for opportunities. That wasn't a crime. But now I wondered how many conversations I'd ignored simply because I wanted peace. The realization hurt. Because denial can look an awful lot like optimism. Eventually I drove home. The house greeted me with its familiar silence. For years that silence had felt lonely. Now it felt useful. Place to think. A place to observe. A place where nobody could tell me what I was supposed to believe. I carried Frank's letter into the living room and sat in his favorite recliner. The leather creaked softly beneath me. I unfolded the letter again. Read every line. Then read it once more. One sentence kept returning. Anyone who truly loves you will want you to remain independent for as long as possible. Independent. The word seemed increasingly important. Not because of money. Because of freedom. The freedom to decide. The freedom to choose. The freedom to remain yourself. I was still staring at the letter when my phone rang. Michael. I watched the screen for several seconds before answering. Hello. Mom. His voice sounded strangely cheerful. Too cheerful. The way people sound when they're trying to keep a conversation on safe ground. We were wondering if you'd like to come over tonight. My pulse quickened immediately. We. Not I. We. Always we. Vanessa and Michael. A single unit. A single voice. A single plan. What for? Oh, nothing special. Another phrase I no longer trusted. Just dinner. I glanced at the clock. 5:30. The invitation felt last minute. Almost rushed. As though something had changed. As though they suddenly wanted me somewhere specific. Under observation. I hated that my mind now worked this way. But once trust breaks, suspicion fills the space it leaves behind. What time? 7. I considered declining, then remembered Frank's words. Observe. Listen. Be patient. The truth reveals itself. All right. Great. The relief in Michael's voice didn't escape me. We'll see you then. The call ended. I sat quietly for a moment, then smiled. Not because I was happy, because for the first time I wasn't walking into a family gathering blind. I was paying attention. At 6:45, I pulled into Michael and Vanessa's driveway. The house looked beautiful. It always did. Fresh landscaping, perfect shutters, clean windows, the kind of home featured in real estate brochures. Vanessa cared deeply about appearances. Inside, everything smelled like roasted chicken and rosemary. Warm, inviting, comfortable. Exactly the kind of environment where people lowered their guard. Vanessa greeted me at the door. Evelyn. Her smile arrived immediately. Polished. Practiced. Perfect. I smiled back. Vanessa. For the briefest moment, something flickered in her eyes. Uncertainty. Not much. Just enough. She wasn't entirely sure what I knew. Good. I wanted to keep it that way. The dining room table was already set. Michael stood pouring wine. The television hummed softly from another room. Everything looked normal. Again. Always normal. That was becoming the most suspicious thing of all. Dinner began pleasantly enough. Weather. Local news. Neighborhood updates. Safe topics. Meaningless topics. Then, halfway through the meal, Vanessa casually introduced the real reason I'd been invited. The transition was so smooth that another version of me might have missed it. Evelyn. I looked up. Yes. She smiled. We've been talking about your future. The fork paused halfway to my mouth. There it was. Not our future. Not family plans. My future. Discussed without me. I set the fork down carefully. Oh. Michael immediately looked uncomfortable. Not surprised. Uncomfortable. Interesting. Vanessa nodded. We just want to make sure everything is easier for you. Easier. Another dangerous word. I remained silent. Vanessa continued. You've been under a lot of stress lately. Michael stared at his plate. My chest tightened. Not because of Vanessa. Because of him. His silence. His willingness to let someone else define me while he sat there pretending not to notice. We've noticed some changes. There it was again. Changes. Memory. Confusion. Concern. The same narrative. Repeated endlessly. I folded my napkin. What kind of changes? Vanessa laughed lightly. Oh, nothing serious. Then why bring it up? The question remained unspoken. Michael finally joined the conversation. Mom. His voice sounded careful. We just worry sometimes. The same script. The same language. Almost word for word. I suddenly realized they'd rehearsed this. Not necessarily consciously, but enough times that it had become familiar. Predictable. A coordinated concern. Vanessa reached for her wine glass. We met someone recently. I looked at her. A specialist. The room suddenly felt colder. What kind of specialist? A senior living consultant. Silence. Complete silence. For a moment nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nobody spoke. Then I understood. Not assisted living today. Not a nursing home tomorrow. An idea. A seed. Possibility. Introduced gently. Carefully. Strategically. My pulse hammered. Michael still wouldn't look at me. That hurt more than anything. Because if he believed I needed help, he could have talked to me. If he was worried, he could have asked me. Instead, they had discussed it together. Researched it together. Planned it together. And now they were informing me. Not consulting me. Informing me. Vanessa smiled softly. We're just exploring options. Options. I looked around the room. The expensive dining table. The remodeled kitchen. The granite countertops. The upgraded appliances. The lifestyle. Then I remembered something Helen had said. Power of attorney. Long-term planning. Control. The pieces clicked together. Not perfectly, but enough. Enough to see the outline. Enough to understand the direction. I turned toward Michael. Directly. For the first time all evening. Do you think I can't live alone? His eyes finally met mine. Just for a second. Then drifted away. That single moment told me everything. Because Michael didn't answer immediately. People hesitate when they're searching for the truth. Or hiding it. I'm just saying. His voice faded. Then returned. It might be good to have support. Support. Not independence. Not dignity. Support. The language mattered. The framing mattered. Everything mattered. I smiled gently. The same way Frank used to smile when he already knew more than he was saying. That's interesting. Vanessa tilted her head. What is? I took a sip of water. Then placed the glass down carefully. Because I spent 42 years raising a son. The room went still. And somehow nobody asked what I wanted. Neither of them spoke. For the first time all evening Vanessa's smile weakened. Only slightly. But enough. Because she realized something. The same thing I had finally realized. I wasn't confused. I wasn't fragile. And I wasn't cooperating. As dinner continued, conversation stumbled awkwardly from topic to topic. The warmth was gone. The illusion had cracked. Not shattered. Not yet, but cracked. And as I drove home later that evening, one truth became impossible to ignore. The money wasn't the destination. The money was leverage. The real goal was something much bigger. Something far more valuable. Control. And now that I understood that, I could finally begin preparing for what came next. I didn't cry after the dinner. That surprised me. A week earlier I might have cried. A month earlier I definitely would have. But something had changed. Not my feelings. Those still hurt. The betrayal. The disappointment. The loneliness. All of it remained. What changed was my understanding. Pain becomes easier to carry once you finally know where it comes from. I drove home beneath a sky streaked with deep shades of orange and purple. The neighborhood looked peaceful. Porch lights glowed. Families gathered around dinner tables. Televisions flickered behind curtains. Ordinary life. I parked in my driveway and sat quietly for a moment. Then I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me was 70 years old. Silver hair. Fine lines. Tired eyes. But she wasn't helpless. And for the first time in a long while I saw that clearly. Vanessa wanted me to believe age and weakness were the same thing. They weren't. Age had given me something she underestimated. Patience. I stepped out of the car and carried Frank's letter into the house. The moment I closed the front door behind me, I made a decision. No more reacting. No more guessing. No more hoping things weren't what they appeared to be. From now on I would deal only in facts. Frank would have approved. I walked directly to the study. A small room at the back of the house. Bookshelves lined one wall. A desk sat beneath the window. The room still smelled faintly of old paper and furniture polish. Frank spent countless evenings there balancing accounts and organizing documents. Tonight, it became my headquarters. I switched on the desk lamp. A warm pool of light spread across the surface. Then I began. The first thing I did was create 3 folders. One labeled Financial Records, the second. Legal Documents, the third. Observations. I almost laughed at myself. It felt absurd. Like something from a detective movie. Yet the moment the folders sat neatly arranged before me, I felt calmer. Organized. Prepared. In control. The exact opposite of how Vanessa wanted me to feel. I spent the next several hours reviewing everything. Bank statements. Trust documents. Frank's letter. Notes from my meeting with Helen. Names. Dates. Times. Patterns. Slowly, the chaos began turning into a timeline. A real timeline. Not assumptions. Facts. 6 months ago. Email address changed. 5 months ago. Unknown account created. 5 months ago. Michael added as authorized user. 3 months ago. Power of attorney inquiry. 2 months ago. Increased transfer activity. 1 week ago. Retirement account nearly depleted. The progression was impossible to ignore. Whatever plan existed had not happened overnight. It had been built. Carefully. Deliberately. Over time. My eyes drifted toward a photograph sitting on the desk. Frank holding a fishing rod. Smiling. I remembered something he used to say. Most people reveal themselves if you stop interrupting them. At the time I thought he meant conversations. Now I realized he meant life. People expose their intentions eventually. You simply have to stop helping them hide. The following morning, I woke earlier than usual. 6 o'clock. The house was still dark. I made coffee, opened the kitchen curtains.
Watched down slowly arrive.
Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I checked every account, every password, every online profile, every contact setting, everything. The process took nearly 3 hours. What I found was disturbing. Several recovery email addresses weren't mine. 2 security questions contained answers I never would have chosen. Notification settings had been altered. Paper statements had been disabled. A secondary phone number existed on one account. I didn't recognize it. My stomach tightened. The deeper I looked, the more obvious it became. Someone hadn't simply accessed my finances. They had built infrastructure around them. Layers, backups, redirections, protection. The kind of setup people create when they expect to maintain control. Not borrow it temporarily. Control it permanently. Immediately contacted Helen. She helped me begin changing everything. Passwords, recovery settings, authorization permissions, account alerts. Every modification required additional verification, additional documentation, additional patience. Good. I was done making things easy. By lunchtime I felt exhausted, but satisfied. For the first time in months I knew exactly who had access to my accounts, and who didn't. That evening my phone rang. Vanessa. I stared at the screen, then answered. Hello. Evelyn. The warmth in her voice felt almost rehearsed now. I wanted to check on you. Of course she did. I smiled. Not because she could see it, because suddenly the conversation felt different. For the first time I knew something she didn't. She didn't know I had changed everything. She didn't know her access was gone. She didn't know her visibility had disappeared. And that knowledge gave me an advantage. Infine. Good. A pause. Then, I was thinking about our conversation last night. I waited. Vanessa continued. We only want what's best for you. There it was again. The familiar phrase. The protective mask. The concern. I no longer heard kindness in those words. I heard positioning, framing, control. That's kind of you. The silence that followed surprised her. She expected resistance, fear, emotion. Instead I gave her calm. Frank always said calm made dishonest people nervous, because calm couldn't be manipulated. Eventually Vanessa spoke again. You sound different. I almost smiled, because she was right. I was different. Not stronger. Not smarter. Simply awake. Doi. Yes. Another pause. Longer this time. Then. Did you figure things out with the bank? There it was. The real reason for the call. Not concern. Information gathering. I leaned back in my chair. The late afternoon sun filtered through the study window. Dust drifted through the light. Everything felt strangely peaceful. No. The lie came easily. We're still reviewing things. Silence. Then. Oh. Disappointment. Tiny. Brief. But unmistakable. Interesting. Very interesting. We spoke for another minute before ending the call. The moment she hung up, I wrote down everything. Time. Duration. Questions asked. Tone. Details. For the first time, I was documenting instead of defending. Observing instead of reacting. Frank would have been proud. 3 days later, another development arrived. Unexpected. Helen called shortly after noon. Her voice sounded urgent. Evelyn. My pulse quickened immediately. What happened? I received additional records. I sat up straight. What kind of records? The pause felt endless. Then, property records. Property. The word immediately caught my attention. I frowned. What do property records have to do with my accounts? Another pause. Longer this time. Long enough to make my heart race. Finally Helen spoke. Evelyn. Her voice had changed. Serious. Concerned. Has anyone discussed selling your house? Every muscle in my body went rigid. The room suddenly felt smaller. the air heavier. I looked around slowly. The bookshelves, the photographs, the dining room visible through the doorway, Frank's chair, my home, the home we'd built together, the home where Michael took his first steps, the home where every Christmas morning happened, the home where Frank's laughter still lived in the walls. No. The answer barely escaped my lips. Helen inhaled slowly, then said the sentence that made my blood run cold. Because someone has been asking questions about the property's ownership structure. For several seconds I couldn't breathe. The money, the power of attorney, the assisted living conversations, the long-term planning, the control. And now, the house. Suddenly the entire picture became terrifyingly clear. They weren't trying to manage my finances. They were preparing for a future where I no longer controlled anything at all. For a long time after Helen's call ended, I sat motionless in Frank's study. The house. They had been asking about the house. Not the retirement account. Not the trust. Not the savings. The house. The realization settled over me with a strange sense of clarity. Like a puzzle finally revealing its image after weeks of confusion. The money had never been the destination. It was preparation. Control the accounts. Control the information. Control the decisions. Control the woman. Eventually control the house. I looked around the room slowly. The bookshelves Frank built himself. The hardwood floors we'd refinished twice. The photographs lining the walls. The little imperfections only a family could love. This wasn't just property. It was a life. Our life. And someone had already begun treating it like an asset waiting to be transferred. The thought hurt. Not because of greed. Because of disrespect. I stood and walked through the house. Not searching. Remembering. The living room where Michael built blanket forts during thunderstorms. The kitchen where Frank danced with me one Christmas Eve while cookies baked in the oven. The hallway where height marks still remained hidden behind a coat rack. Michael at age 7. Age 10. Age 14. Tiny pencil lines documenting a childhood. I touched one of them. For a moment I remembered exactly who my son used to be. The little boy who cried when he accidentally stepped on a bird. The teenager who carried groceries for elderly neighbors. The young man who once told me, "Mom, I'll always take care of you." The memory nearly broke me. Because somewhere along the way that boy had disappeared. Or perhaps something else had happened. Something harder. Perhaps he never disappeared. Perhaps he simply stopped choosing courage. That thought stayed with me all evening. And the next morning. And the day after that. 3 days later I finally got my answer. Or at least part of it. The answer arrived in the form of a phone call. From Michael. "Mom." His voice sounded tired. Not guilty. Not defensive. Just tired. "We need to talk." I closed my eyes. Part of me had been waiting for this. The confrontation. The explanation. The truth. "All right. Can I come by?" I glanced around the kitchen. Morning sunlight filled the room. The same kitchen where this story began. The same kitchen where Vanessa stood smiling while my world quietly shifted. "Come over." An hour later, Michael sat across from me at the dining room table. The table looked exactly as it always had. But everything felt different. For several moments neither of us spoke. The silence stretched. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Necessary. Finally Michael looked. "You've been talking to people." Not a question. A statement. "Interesting." I folded my hands. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "I thought so." The answer surprised me.
No anger. No denial. No outrage.
Just resignation. As though he already knew this moment would come eventually. I studied him carefully. For the first time in weeks he looked older. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone carrying a weight he no longer wanted. The sight softened something inside me. Not enough to erase the betrayal. But enough to remind me he was still my son. "What do you know, Michael?" The question hung between us. For a long time he said nothing. Then he exhaled heavily. More heavily than I'd ever heard. And suddenly I saw it. The exhaustion. The guilt. The conflict. All of it. "I know more than I should." The words landed softly. Yet they hit harder than any confession could have. I remained silent. Giving him room. Frank used to do that. People talk when silence becomes uncomfortable enough. Eventually Michael continued. It didn't start the way you think. I almost laughed. Because every family betrayal begins with those words. It didn't start that way. Nobody wakes up planning to become the villain. People take small steps. Then bigger ones. Then one day they find themselves somewhere they never intended to be. How did it start? Michael stared at the table. Debt. The word surprised me. Not because debt was unusual. Because Michael had always appeared successful. The nice house. The vacations. The renovations. The new cars. The image. Especially the image. What kind of debt? His laugh sounded bitter. More than I could handle. My stomach tightened. The business ventures. The investments. Frank's concerns. Suddenly they seemed much more significant. Michael rubbed his face. Several seconds passed before he spoke again. I made mistakes. The admission sounded genuine. Painfully genuine. I kept thinking one good investment would fix everything. I remembered Frank's words. Shortcuts. The realization stung. Because Frank had seen it years before I had. Michael continued. I lost money. I listened quietly. No one knew. The shame in his voice was unmistakable. Not you. He shook his head. No. Vanessa. Another pause. Then, eventually. Not immediately. Interesting. The timeline mattered. Every detail mattered. What happened when she found out? For the first time, genuine pain crossed his face. She panicked. The answer came immediately. Too immediately. Meaning he'd replayed the conversation many times. Maybe hundreds. She was terrified we'd lose everything. The house. The lifestyle. The image. Everything. I understood that much. But understanding wasn't forgiveness. Not even close. Michael looked toward the window, avoiding my eyes again. Then she started talking about solutions. My pulse quickened.
Solution.
The same word Vanessa always used. A dangerous word. One capable of disguising almost anything. I remained silent. Michael continued. At first it was harmless. My stomach tightened. Because nothing harmful ever introduces itself honestly. It was supposed to be temporary. Of course it was. Temporary. Another classic word. Temporary becomes permanent surprisingly often. What was? The question barely escaped my lips. Michael swallowed. Then finally looked directly at me. The eye contact lasted only seconds. But it was enough. Enough to tell me how ashamed he felt. Enough to tell me he already knew there was no excuse. Using your money. The room went silent. Completely silent. I wasn't shocked. Not anymore. Part of me had already known. But hearing it aloud still hurt. A different kind of hurt. The kind that settles deep. The kind that changes something permanently. Michael looked away again. It was supposed to be borrowed. Borrowed. Not stolen. Borrowed. Amazing how often language tries to soften reality. Without asking me? He flinched. The reaction answered the question before words did. I waited. Eventually he nodded. A tiny movement. Barely visible. Yet devastating. For a moment I thought I might cry. Instead I felt calm. A terrible calm. The kind that arrives after the truth finally stops hiding. Did you know about the account? Another pause. Then, yes. The answer hurt. More than the money. More than the deception. More than anything. Because now I knew. Michael hadn't been manipulated into everything. He had participated. Maybe not all of it. Maybe not the worst of it. But enough. Enough to carry responsibility. I stood slowly and walked toward the window. Outside, a breeze moved through the trees. Leaves drifted across the lawn. Autumn had fully arrived. Behind me, Michael spoke again. His voice sounded smaller now. More vulnerable. Mom. I didn't turn around. I never wanted this. The sentence hung in the room. And for the first time I believed him. That was the tragedy. Not that he wanted it. That he allowed it. Because weakness can damage people almost as deeply as cruelty. I stared out at the yard Frank once cared for. The roses. The maple tree. The old bird feeder. Then I asked the question I feared most. The question that truly mattered. What about the house? The silence behind me was immediate and devastating, because I didn't need an answer. The silence was the answer. When Michael finally spoke, his voice barely rose above a whisper. Vanessa thought it might be necessary eventually. Necessary. There it was. The final mask falling away. Not concern. Not support. Not planning. Necessary. As though my home had become an obstacle. As though my independence was merely a delay. As though my life belonged to someone else's schedule. I closed my eyes, and in that moment something ended. Not my love for my son. That would always remain. But the version of him I'd spent years protecting inside my memory. That version was gone. And standing in its place was a man who had allowed fear, debt, and convenience to become more important than integrity. The hardest truth of all wasn't that Michael betrayed me. It was that he knew better. And did it anyway. After Michael left, I sat alone in the living room until the sun disappeared. The house grew darker around me. The familiar shadows stretched across the floor. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner. Outside, the wind carried dry autumn leaves across the driveway. For the first time since this began, there were no more questions. No more mysteries. No more missing pieces. The truth was finally complete. And somehow that hurt more than uncertainty ever had. The money mattered. The house mattered. The legal documents mattered. But those weren't the deepest wounds. The deepest wound was realizing that my son had looked at my trust, my savings, my independence, and decided they were negotiable. Not because he hated me, because he convinced himself he had no other choice. That was the tragedy. People often imagine betrayal as an act of cruelty. Sometimes it is. But more often, betrayal begins with justification. A person tells themselves a story. Just this once. Just temporarily. Just until things improve. Just until the emergency passes. And little by little, they become someone they never intended to be. I understood that now. And understanding made forgiveness possible. But it did not make trust possible. Those are two different things. A week later, I met with Helen Linda and a new attorney. Not Martin Hayes. He had fully retired. But he had personally recommended someone before leaving practice. A woman named Rebecca Cole. Sharp-eyed, careful, patient. The kind of person who listened more than she spoke. I liked her immediately. The meeting lasted nearly 4 hours. We reviewed everything. The retirement account. The unauthorized access. The power of attorney inquiry. The trust documents. The property records. Frank's protective clause. Every detail. Every date. Every decision. When we finished, Rebecca folded her hands and looked directly at me. Evelyn. Yes. You have options. The words surprised me. Options. Not problems. Not consequences. Options. For weeks, everyone else had been discussing my future as though it belonged to them. This was the first time someone reminded me it still belonged to me. I smiled. A genuine smile. The first in quite some time. Good. Rebecca nodded. The first thing I recommend is complete separation. And so that's what we did. Every account. Every access point. Every authorization. Everything. Michael and Vanessa lost all financial access. Every password changed. Every account secured. Every document updated. The trust was amended again. Additional protections were added. The house was protected. The retirement funds were protected. Most importantly, my independence was protected. The process took weeks. And through it all, neither Michael nor Vanessa realized how much had changed. Not at first. Then one afternoon Vanessa called. The moment I heard her voice I knew. She had discovered something. Evelyn. No warmth this time. No practice concern. No kerfelswitnis. Just tension. I sat in my kitchen. The same kitchen where this story began. Sunlight streamed through the curtains. Frank's mug sat on the shelf. Everything felt strangely peaceful. Hello, Vanessa. A pause. Then, the bank won't discuss your accounts anymore. There it was. The first crack in the mask. I stirred my tea slowly. No. Why? Such a simple question. Yet it revealed everything. Not concern. Not curiosity. Entitlement. Why had access been removed? Why wasn't she still involved? I took a sip of tea. Because they're my accounts. The silence that followed lasted several seconds. Then she said something I'll never forget. We were only trying to help. For months those words controlled me. For months those words made me doubt myself. For months those words disguised manipulation as kindness. But not anymore. I looked out the kitchen window toward the garden Frank planted years ago. Then I answered. No. My voice remained calm, steady, certain. You were trying to manage me. The silence became absolute. And in that silence something finally ended. Not the relationship. The illusion. A few days later Michael came to see me. Alone. For the first time in years.
No, Vanessa.
No explanations prepared by someone else. Just my son. He looked exhausted. Older. Smaller somehow. Like a man finally forced to stand alone with his choices. We sat at the dining room table. The same table where Frank once taught him honesty. The same table where I helped him with homework. The same table where so many versions of our family had existed. For a long time neither of us spoke. Then Michael looked at me. Really looked at me. And said, I'm sorry.
No excuses. No explanations. No justifications.
Just those 2 words. I believed him. That surprised me. After everything that happened, I still believed him. Not because trust had returned, because regret had. There were tears in his eyes. The kind a person can't fake. And for the first time since this began, I saw the little boy again. Not fully. Not permanently. Just for a moment. The boy who once wanted to be good. The boy who once knew right from wrong. The boy Frank and I raised. I know, I said quietly. And I did. I knew he was sorry. I also knew sorry wasn't enough. Both things can be true. Michael lowered his head. I don't expect forgiveness. I thought about that. Then smiled sadly. I've already forgiven you. His eyes widened. But forgiveness doesn't rebuild trust. The words hung between us. Heavy. Honest. Necessary. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then Michael nodded. Because he understood. Finally understood. Some consequences cannot be negotiated away. Some losses cannot be undone. Some bridges require years to rebuild. And some never fully return to what they once were. When he left that afternoon, I watched him walk down the driveway. The same driveway where Frank taught him how to ride a bicycle. The same driveway where we waved goodbye on his first day of college. The same driveway where life had unfolded one ordinary day at a time. I felt sadness, but not bitterness. That surprised me too, because bitterness requires constant attention. And I was tired of giving this story more of my life than it had already taken. Winter arrived slowly that year. The maple tree in the front yard lost its leaves. Christmas came and went quietly. I spent more time with friends, joined a book club, volunteered at the library again. Not because I needed distraction, because life was still happening, and I intended to participate in it. One snowy afternoon in January, I found myself standing in the backyard. The air was cold. The garden slept beneath a blanket of white. I looked toward the spot where Frank used to grow tomatoes. Then I thought about everything that had happened. The money, the accounts, the lies, the manipulation, the discoveries, the heartbreak, the truth, and finally the freedom. Because that's what I had regained. Not money. Freedom. The freedom to make my own choices. The freedom to protect my own life. The freedom to remain myself. I slipped my hands into my coat pockets and smiled. A small smile. The kind that comes from peace rather than victory. Because this story never ended with revenge. There was no dramatic courtroom scene. No public humiliation. No perfect ending. Real life rarely works that way. Instead, the truth came out. Masks fell away. Relationships changed. Trust broke. And a woman who had almost been convinced she was becoming powerless remembered something important. Age does not erase dignity. Grief does not erase wisdom. And love does not require surrendering control of your own life. The house still belongs to me. Frank's chair still sits beside the window. The garden still blooms every spring. Some wounds remain. Perhaps they always will. But so does hope. And these days, when sunlight spills across my kitchen table in the morning, I often think about something Frank wrote in his letter. Anyone who truly loves you will want you to remain independent for as long as possible. He was right. He usually was. I pour myself a cup of coffee, look around the home we built together, and remember that protecting your dignity isn't selfish. It's necessary, especially when the people closest to you forget that it belongs to you.